Okay. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for coming, and I hope I can share and give you some strategies on overcoming fear, anxiety, and depression in these uncertain times. So there is really a lot of uncertainty and difficulty during this time, and we really need all the help that we can get so that we can learn to cope with what is going on. I will be following this outline. I will start with a discussion on I would just like to introduce you to the disaster management cycle. It's important to know about this because, just a moment, okay, so that we can situate ourselves in what is going on. This is the framework that is used in planning interventions when there are catastrophic events. And so it is important that we know what this is. And then when Butch contacted me to give this talk, he came up with the title, Overcoming Fear, Anxiety, and Depression. And so I would like to define these terms because so that we're on the same page and we understand it all in the same way. So these are really emotions, normal emotions that we all feel. But I would also like to bring up and talk about grief because I came upon an article recently on the Harvard Business Review that talks about how grief is probably what we are really all experiencing right now with everything that's happening. And I would like you to be able to differentiate this grief from depression. And when we talk about depression, this afternoon, we're talking about clinical depression. And then lastly, we'll talk about some strategies that you can use to overcome these negative emotions. And when we talk about coping strategies, there is really no one size fits all, no? We all cope with difficult situations differently, no, in our own way. And there is really no right and wrong way, but what we always remind everyone is to be flexible in our coping skills, no? Anything, if taken to an extreme, can be maladaptive. So it's important to have a variety of different tools, coping skills that you can use for difficult situations. So, okay. So this is the disaster management cycle. If you look at this, the disaster management cycle, about 2/3 of the process is about preparedness or preparing for a disaster. So that is really the most important thing to do. Let us also define what a disaster is. So disasters are sudden events that result in great loss of lives. So, and I think we can describe what's going on right now as actually a disaster. So if we think back to very recent events, a very recent disaster is the Taal volcano eruption, which just happened last January 12, 2020. For that particular disaster, we really had a lot of time to prepare for, I think, many months, if not years. We were in level 1 of preparedness. So the FIVOX was always saying that there is some activity going on in the volcano. So there was a lot of time to prepare. I'm sure the barangays and the areas around the volcano were prepared for their response in the case of such an event happening. So when the Taal volcano erupted, there were evacuation centers ready. Relief operations went on smoothly. And soon enough, that alert level 4 was slowly de-escalated to alert level 3. People started going back to their homes, and that is the recovery phase of a disaster. Now, this disaster that we're experiencing right now is quite different. We didn't really have a lot of time to prepare. When I was researching on what happened, the first few cases of pneumonia in Wuhan came up around the middle of December. And by January 1, early January, the first death in Wuhan happened. And by January 23, they locked down Wuhan. And then by January 30, we identified our first case of the coronavirus infected individual in the Philippines. And then by March, we had our first local transmission in the country. So there was hardly any time to prepare for this pandemic. Within a few weeks, if not months, the event was just upon us, and we had to respond. And another difference about this disaster, if you compare it to the Taal volcano eruption, recovery cannot be as easily defined when that is going to happen. Will we say that we're in the recovery phase when the lockdown is lifted? We're not sure, because once it's lifted, the number of cases can easily spike again. So we really don't know. And in the future, what we know even now is that there will probably be a new normal already. And the new normal by then is not the normal that we all know from before this pandemic started. So it is really very different from the normal or usual disasters that we have encountered in the past, and how to manage it will probably be also different. So because of this, we are really faced with so many different negative emotions. And it is normal to feel all of these negative emotions: fear, anxiety, depression, worry, stress, panic. These are normal emotions in an abnormal situation. So I would often hear people encouraging each other, saying, during this time, it's okay not to be okay. So let's talk about some of these emotions. Okay, so fear. What is fear? When you say you're afraid of something. You're afraid of something. You know what is causing your fear. So in this situation, we might be afraid of becoming sick. Not just of the coronavirus, but even people who are sick, maybe they have a chronic medical problem, they have hypertension, diabetes, or some other medical condition. They're afraid of consulting their doctors because they don't want to go to the hospital. They're afraid of their condition getting worse because they don't want to be confined in a hospital where there are persons infected with coronavirus. We're afraid of becoming infected with the coronavirus. So these are normal and expected fears. Okay? It's understandable if you're afraid of this. We're afraid that we might die from the virus if we get infected, even if we know that 80% of the cases are mild cases. We're afraid that we might die because maybe I'm an elderly person already and I'm at high risk, or because I have other medical conditions that put me at risk. We're afraid of the quarantine and of being quarantined, being isolated from our loved ones, being alone. Where will we go? How will we take care of our needs? So these are fears that we have. There are a lot of uncertainties. Uncertainties about the future, uncertainties about trust issues, like, is this person next to me when I go out? Is he may be an asymptomatic carrier? So there are a lot of uncertainties right now. We have a problem now with trusting even the medical system. Do they know what they're doing? Because there are a lot of unknowns about the coronavirus. There are trust issues with our government. Do they know what they're doing? Will they do what is right? Okay, so this is where all of our fear is coming from. So fear is something, we are afraid of something that we know what we are afraid of. There is a specific cause for our fear. Fear is also something that is in the here and now, meaning what you're afraid of is something that is right here in your present. It's something that you can see. It is causing you a lot of fear, and it is with you right now. When you're afraid, there is also a narrowing of attention, meaning your vision starts to become a tunnel vision. You only see one thing. You're very focused on what you're afraid of. You zero in on that target because you want to make sure that you'll be able to handle it, fight or fly, right? And fear is something that is usually objective and rational, meaning anybody can understand why you're afraid of what you're afraid of, okay? So that is what is fear. Now, I would like to differentiate that from anxiety, no? So unlike fear, anxiety is something that is more diffuse, meaning there is not necessarily something clear-cut that causes the anxiety or the tension. The anxiety is usually about something in the future. It's not here with you right now. It's something that is still in your future, but you're thinking it might happen, and that is what you're anxious about. In anxiety, unlike in fear, there is a broadening of attention, meaning unlike in fear where there is like a tunnel vision, in anxiety, you see everything, you feel everything. So a slight sound over there causes you to jump. You feel everything that is going on in your body because you're afraid that you might have an anxiety or a panic attack. So you experience everything. There is a broadening of attention in anxiety. And in anxiety, it is something that is subjective. You are the one who feels the anxiety. It is not necessarily something that is obvious to people around you. They do not see what you are afraid of. Okay, so that is the difference between fear and anxiety. Now, let me just share with you this quote from David Kessler. This is from that article I was telling you about on grief. David Kessler is the foremost expert in grief. He co-authored The Stages of Grief with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and this is what he said. We feel the world has changed, and it has. We know this is temporary, but it doesn't feel that way. And we realize things will be different. Just as going to the airport is forever different from how it was before 9/11, things will change. And this is the point at which they changed. The loss of normalcy, the fear of economic toll, the loss of connection, this is hitting us and we're grieving collectively. We are not used to this kind of collective grief. So grief and fear, usually it's something that we experience ourselves or as in small groups. But the grief that we are experiencing now is something that is common to all mankind. That is what he means when he says collective grief. So what is grief? Excuse me. So grief is the sadness that is connected to an identifiable loss. And what have we lost at this time? We have lost maybe a loved one. We know someone who has passed away because of infection from this virus. Someone who may be very dear to us, or maybe it is someone we know. At the very least, we've lost someone we know. There is the loss of the way of life. Life will never be the same again from what we have known life to be before. We have lost freedom. We have lost our mobility. I miss driving. I love to drive, but we have lost that. And there is also the loss of income. Okay? And some other people may have even lost their jobs. Okay? So grief, as compared to depression, grief is a sadness where the focus of our sadness is the loss. Okay? I am sad because of what I have lost. Okay? I'm sad because I miss that which I have lost. I miss the way of life, the mobility, etc. In grief, the sadness is fluctuating. You still somehow have the ability to feel pleasure. So it comes and goes, the sadness. Every now and then, that sadness is interspersed with pleasure. In grief, there is also the fluctuation of physical symptoms, because I'm sure you have heard it before, where people describe their grief, their sadness from the loss, as something that is very physically palpable to them. They feel it as a heaviness on their chest, but even those physical symptoms are fluctuating in grief. Closeness of others is usually comforting when you're grieving. So having people around you comforts you when you're grieving. That is why our rituals around burial, the wake, helps us when we're grieving. We may experience some guilt over some aspects of the loss, but it is guilt about the loss. Okay? So that is also possible in grief. But in grief, self-esteem is usually preserved even after the loss. So you know you miss the person you lost, you're sad about that, but you preserve your self-esteem. You know you are your own person. You know you maintain your self-confidence, your belief in yourself, in your ability to continue on with life. And if you have thoughts of death or wanting to die when you're grieving, it is usually related to the desire of being reunited with the person you lost. So that is what grief is. Now, there is also something that is called anticipatory grief. This is when we have not lost something yet, but we are anticipating losing it. So we're even now we're grieving it. It's making us sad thinking about that. A common example here would be when we think about someday losing our parents. Someday they're going to die. They're going to pass away. And when we think about that, that is what is anticipatory grief. But this anticipatory grief is more akin to anxiety. So when you think about that, when you suddenly have that thought that maybe one day my mother will pass away, it is more of an anxiety mixed with sadness. So that is what grief is. Now, you're all also familiar with the stages of grief. Okay? What I would like to emphasize here is that when these are stages that don't occur linearly or sequentially. So you can jump from one stage or one emotion to another. Okay? But these are the common emotions associated with the grieving process. Okay? So I think it's very important for you to know about this, because as we said, there is a lot of grief now that we're feeling because of what's going on, because of many things that we have lost because of this situation. Knowing will help us identify what emotion you're feeling, and naming the emotion helps tame that emotion. Okay, so let's start with denial. So this is usually the first reaction when you lose something, or when you lose something, or when something bad happens. In our case, we were in denial about this virus. We were in denial that it was going to affect us. In the early stages, people were still going out because they felt that they were not vulnerable to this virus. Okay, so denial, that is what denial is. Okay, then anger, like you become angry. Why are they forcing me to stay home? Why should I stay home? I know how to take care of myself when I go out, or if I go out, so I'm not going to stay home, and that is anger. Another stage is bargaining. Okay, so I really have to stay home. I'm going to do physical distancing. I'm going to do social distancing, and that's going to spare me from this virus, right? I'm going to be safe. But so somehow there is that rationalization in our mind. If I do this, then I'm going to be safe. But of course, nothing is certain, right? And then there's sadness. Okay, sadness about having to do all of these things, having to make all of these changes, having to deal with all of these losses. And then, of course, acceptance. And acceptance is the key to the grief process. It is when you come to that point of acceptance, when you can say, okay, this is the reality, this is what's going on, what do I have to do now? Okay, this is the new normal. How do I now do what I have to do, work, earn, stay connected with my family in spite of this situation? So those are the stages of grief. And again, I'd like to emphasize it doesn't happen linearly, and not everybody gets to the point of acceptance, unfortunately. So if you do not get to that point of acceptance, the sadness may become depression. So let's look at depression and distinguish it from grief. So depression can happen because of a loss. It can be triggered by the loss. Like in our situation, it can be triggered by the many different losses that has happened in our life right now. But not all depressions, and you have to remember that, can be linked to a loss. Okay, some people feel depressed even if they did not experience a loss. Okay. In depression also, unlike in grief, the person's focus, the depressed person's focus is himself. So it's not about, I miss the person I lost or the person who passed away. It's more of, I am no longer, my life is not worth living anymore because he's not around anymore. I'm worthless because he's not here in my life. So that is depression. Unlike in grief, your focus is about the person you lost. In depression, your focus is yourself. A person who's depressed is unable to feel any pleasure. So they are constantly sad. Their ability to function is impaired. They cannot work. They cannot love. That is what happens when you're depressed. They tend to isolate themselves from others. Interacting with others becomes a chore. It is very difficult. Unlike with a grieving person, interaction, closeness with others can give them relief. In depression, there is a generalized feeling of guilt, and they tend to be preoccupied with guilt. They blame themselves for the loss, or they blame themselves for what is going on. In depression, there is a feeling of worthlessness and self-loathing. And it is not uncommon to have thoughts of death or suicide because of these feelings of guilt, worthlessness, or not even deserving to live anymore because of the sadness. So that is the difference between depression and grief. So as we continue our discussions, I would just like you to remember that when we say depression, depression is something clinical, okay? So when you're feeling sad now, it is probably more of just sadness and not depression. So how do you now cope, thrive, survive in this situation? What can you? Okay, this is a strategy that is not talked about a lot, but I think it is very important for us to know. In that disaster management cycle that I told you about, the biggest chunk in that cycle is the preparatory phase. It is really very important for us to be prepared for whatever will happen, for an event, for a catastrophic event. So preparing is very important. What do we have to prepare for? Because preparing will determine how prepared you are for an event will determine how you will respond to it and what will happen during the recovery phase as well. So the more prepared you are for an event, the better the response, the better the recovery. So it's very important to be prepared for the worst, the eventuality that you may get infected, okay? That you might need hospitalization, okay? So one of the things that you have to do to prepare for this is to talk to your family. You have to talk to your family. What you want? What are your desires? What hospital do you want to be brought to? Maybe it's also important to have advanced directives. This is a medical term where we want people to give advanced directions to an assigned member of their family on how they want the medical team to proceed in case the person loses the ability to make that decision himself or herself. So it's important to talk about this. So this is a discussion that I had early on with my children. They're all adults. And I talked to them about the interventions that I want. I assigned one of my children to be the one to make the decisions. It's also important to tell them about your insurance policies, your financial status, what's going on, they will do, what will happen in case you're not around anymore to make decisions for them. Okay, so it's very important to prepare for the worst. Okay, that is one of the strategies that we have to use. Another strategy is being aware. Now, this situation, this pandemic, is really unprecedented. It has rekindled a lot of negative emotions within ourselves. And so it is possible that it may have also triggered or rekindled some negative issues or unresolved issues from your past. Maybe fears, trust issues maybe, or fears of abandonment. So when these are triggered, your reactions to this current pandemic may probably not just be coming from the pandemic itself. Maybe some of the reactions is a result of old wounds that have been brought to the surface. Okay? So it's important to monitor yourself and your emotions. It's important to know when it is already abnormal. Earlier, we talked about how negative emotions are normal in this situation. But it's also important to know when this negative emotions is already abnormal. So it's abnormal when you are being overwhelmed by these intense emotions, when you're experiencing panic or exhaustion. So it's overwhelming. This negative emotions becomes consuming to you. When you are resisting it too much to the point that you really don't want to think about it and you just want to escape it. Some people just want to sleep to escape what's going on. Some people use substances or drugs or alcohol to escape the reality of their situation. Okay, so that can also be abnormal already. Having disturbing, persistent images and thoughts or flashbacks, nightmares, that interfere with your ability to function. Because of these flashbacks or nightmares, you're extremely anxious and tense the whole day, or you're not sleeping very well, then it may be already an abnormal reaction. Strong, persistent bodily reactions. For some people, their medical conditions can be exacerbated by these negative emotions. Your blood pressure might be poorly controlled because of these negative emotions. Your blood sugar levels might not be controlled well because of these negative emotions. You may experience chronic headaches, etc. So when this is happening, you have to be aware that maybe the increase or worsening of your physical condition or medical condition might be because of the negative emotions. Okay, and also if there are long-term problems in your ability to love and work. In other words, it is already affecting your social life, your occupational life, then that is definitely abnormal already. So it's important to know that, be aware of it, and if you know that it's happening to you, be willing to ask for help. Now, this next strategies that I will share with you are strategies that you can use in case your negative emotions, it's still within normal. Okay, but it can be sometimes overwhelming. Sometimes it is affecting you a lot. Okay, so what can you do? As I said earlier, there is no one size fits all when it comes to coping strategies. And if you really think about it, there are so many coping strategies available on the internet, on social media. It's all over the place. So this next strategies that I will share with you is something that I have come up with myself, putting all of these other strategies together. So it's by no means complete. I'm sure I will miss a lot of other coping strategies, but I hope that you will find this helpful. So, I think the basis for these coping strategies or strategies that I'm going to share with you is the Serenity Prayer, the long version of the Serenity Prayer. And many of you, Glorious Hope participants and workers are very familiar with this Serenity Prayer. So that is the basis of this strategies, the next strategies that I will share with you. Okay, so first, let's start with the opening part of this prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. So, acknowledge and accept. It's important to know what are the things that you cannot change and acknowledge it and accept that it's there. The strategy that you can use here is called the STOP strategy. This is a very popular strategy used in psychology, but I have tweaked it a little bit. So STOP is a mnemonic. So first you stop. S, stop. Take a pause. When you're suddenly overwhelmed by negative emotions, stop. When you catch yourself being overwhelmed by negative emotions, stop. Then T, take a deep breath. It can just be one breath, but several deep breaths may be helpful. It can even be just a very big, deep sigh, okay? But taking a deep breath is very helpful. The breath is one of the things that is within our control in the stress response. We cannot control our heart rate. We cannot control our blood pressure. We cannot control our blood vessels, but we can control our breath. And when we control our breath and consciously take deep, slow breaths, it calms and relaxes the stress response or the fight and flight response. Okay, so just taking those deep breaths will calm your fight or flight response. Okay, then you observe. What do you observe? You observe your external environment. What is happening? What is causing you to feel these emotions? What is going on? Okay, and like I said, acknowledge if it is something that is not within your control. And then you also look within yourself. Aside from looking or observing the environment, look internally. So what do you look at? You look at your thoughts, your emotions, and your behavior. We'll unwrap that more in the next slide. And P is proceed. Okay. I hope you can see this picture of the brain. We have our reptilian brain, the limbic system, which is the seat of our emotions, and our rational brain, which evolved more recently, which is our thinking brain. When we're overwhelmed by our emotions, the limbic brain or our emotional brain takes over our thinking brain. And anything and everything that we do is determined by our emotions. It's no longer really determined by good rational judgment. Okay, so if that happens, your behavior becomes railroaded by your emotions, and that's not really a good thing. So let's unwrap what you observe. You observe your thoughts, your emotions, and your behavior. Because when something happens, all of this, the thoughts, emotions, behavior, are all intertwined. Okay? So you have to tease this out and look at each one separately. Okay? The basis for this is cognitive behavioral therapy, but this is something that is really more basic. So in cognitive behavioral therapy, the basis for that kind of therapy is that what we think affects how we feel and how we act, and what we do affects how we think and how we feel, and what we feel also affects what we think and what we do. So all of these three things, your thoughts, your emotions, and your behavior, are all intertwined. And when something happens, something overwhelming, all of these things are happening at the same time. You have to take a pause to give your thinking brain time to catch up with your emotional brain. So you're not just acting based on your emotions, okay? Let's give some examples for that, okay? So for example, in this current situation, in this current crisis, okay, panic buying, we know that there are some people who have behaved in this way. So if you just look at the behavior and what that person is doing, we can be quite judgmental about that, and it can affect that, and we have our own reactions to it. But if you really unpack it and think about it, what is going on in a person who is panic buying? What is driving that behavior? The thought is probably, I don't know when this is going to end. I might run out of supplies. I have to take care of myself, or else I'm going to run out of food. That is the thought. And what is driving that thought and that behavior is the fear. Fear of running out of food, of not surviving, of dying of hunger, right? So that is one example. Another is this phenomenon, or what's going on, where people are discriminating against hospital or healthcare workers. In the early part of this crisis, I have heard of some of our residents in St. Luke's who were being thrown out of their boarding houses, of their condo units, because they were healthcare workers. You've heard of a healthcare worker, I think he was a nurse, who was, somebody threw Clorox on that nurse. People asking people who are determined to be COVID positive to leave their subdivisions, or they're cordoned off. They shouldn't leave their houses. So this was going on in the early phases of this crisis. If you unpack it, what is driving the behavior of these people who were discriminating is the thought that I might get infected. This might spread. This is what I have to do. I have to cordon off the house. I have to throw them out of my apartment or whatever. And what is the emotion driving that is the anxiety. Okay? So these are some examples of what happens if you do not analyze or think about, take a pause to think about what's going on, what's the thought, what's the behavior, what's the emotion in this situation. But if you tease it out that way, it helps you understand where the other persons are coming from, what is driving their behavior. And if you look at it, it is the emotions that is driving that behavior. They are panic buying, they are discriminating because of the emotion which is overwhelming them. That is why it's very important to take a pause before you proceed, before you act, okay? So that you give your rational brain time to choose what is the more appropriate behavior, because the behavior might be maladaptive or not really helpful for you and everybody else around you in the long run. Okay. The second part of the prayer is courage to change the things that I can. So what we are learning from this is that we have to have courage because we are not powerless. And the strategy that you can use here is do what you can. Okay, do your part, do what is within your control. So under this, there are so many things that you can do. You can prepare your home as a response, okay? So make sure that you have enough food. You can prepare your home for working from home, especially with the extended lockdown. In this particular slide that I saw, this picture that I saw, these are some of the things that you can do to prepare your home to work from home. Declutter and have a space, a working space. Separate your working space from your home space so that it's clear to your brain when it's time to relax and when you're in the working mode. You can use apps to help you get in touch with your coworkers, your team, and also remember to take frequent breaks. So this is something that is within our control. These are things that we can do. Another thing that is within our control is how to decontaminate, how to prevent infection, staying home, keeping physical distance, wearing the proper personal protective equipment, using masks, goggles, face shields, etc., proper hand washing, decontaminating, and staying healthy. That is very important. We have to take care of our health. And another important thing that is within our control is taking care of ourselves. Okay? And when we say take care of ourselves, we mean body, mind, and spirit. So you take care of your body by exercising, make sure you eat healthy, make sure you sleep well, make sure that you rest. You take care of your mind by taking up maybe a hobby, doing something that you enjoy during this time, taking relaxation breaks, okay? Limiting your time on social media is a way to take care of your mind too, because a lot of the anxiety can also be driven by too much information, okay? And also, of course, take care of your spirit, because we are a whole being with body, mind, and spirit. So it's important to pray. Don't forget your quiet time, the time for devotion, morning devotion is very important. It's a time to meditate and relax and take care of your spirit. Now, if you are experiencing anxiety, these are very specific tips for you. Like I said, it's important to avoid social media or excessive exposure to social media, because that is one thing that they found that is driving really the fear and anxiety. Make sure that you connect with your friends and your family, because we are social beings. It's important for us to stay connected. Add extra time for stress relief, meditation or prayer and self-care, okay? And then for your kids, you have to reassure them that they're safe. It's important to talk to them about what's going on. Allow them to talk about their worries, their fears, and share some of the coping mechanisms that you're learning with them. Also, limit their time, their exposure to the news. And if you are feeling sad or depressed, if you're starting to feel down, one thing that has evidence base is a gratitude journal. So journaling, remembering or reminding yourself every end of the day, what are the things that you are grateful for? You can just list 3 things. And if you do this consistently, it has been shown to improve your mood. It can really improve your mood. Okay, and this is the end part of that prayer. And it is also very important. Living one day at a time. Enjoying one moment at a time. What is the what is something that we have to remember about that? We have to remember that this is not permanent. Even if it seems like this is, it seems to be going on and on and on. The 2 weeks initial lockdown became a month, and now it's 2 months. But this too will end. Nothing is permanent, as it says there. Then accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is. So not as I would have it. So find meaning, find purpose in what's going on. Don't take things personally, okay? Trusting that God, will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. So this is something that really, it's something that we have to remember. And the imagery that I have for that is, imagine yourself in the sea, and the sea is not very calm. There are waves. But if you really look at it very closely, there are small waves, there are big waves. In the same way with this life, with our problems, there are small waves, there are big waves. But even those waves is not permanent. So the strategy here is to allow what is going on, because it is not permanent. Nothing is permanent. Allow what is going on because there is a purpose for this. So maybe these waves will bring you somewhere, a very nice destination. Who knows? Allow it because it's not personal. This is not happening just to you. This is happening to all of us. Everybody is experiencing this pain. So just allow it. And another image in my mind is how Peter is able to walk on water as long as he keeps his eyes focused on Jesus. So this is a reminder that we should really be still and know that He is God. He will take care of us. He's in control of the world. He's in control of the universe. So let's just allow. And then, right now, we are still in the response phase, but we will eventually get to the recovery phase. And that recovery phase, as we said, is no longer the old normal that we know. It is going to be a new normal. So again, it's important to prepare for this new normal. Even now, while we're still in the response phase, let's prepare for that new normal so that we are better equipped when we get to that recovery phase. So in summary, how do you overcome fear, anxiety, and depression? And the strategies that I shared with you are, first, it's important to be prepared for the worst and for the new normal. It's important to be aware, to watch out for your abnormal reactions. And if you are having abnormal reactions, please don't hesitate to seek help. And lastly, keep in mind the Serenity Prayer. And if we break that down, it's important to acknowledge and accept. Let's not deny what is going on. Let's not just sweep things under the rug. Let's acknowledge it and accept it. And you can use the stop technique. Stop, take a breath, observe before you proceed, and take courage, because there are things which are within your control. There are things that you can do. And then you allow, because nothing is permanent. Look for the purpose of what's happening around us and don't take it personally. So those are the strategies that I hope will be helpful for you in overcoming fear, anxiety, and depression in these uncertain times. Thank you very much.